The first time Eli saw the fox, it was lying in the mud, shivering, broken, and alone. And for the first time in years, Eli felt a flicker of something he had thought was long lost. Hope. The boy didn't know then that the fox would change, his life teaching him that some things, some bonds, are too wild to tame, and some loves are meant to set free. The cry that cut through silence. The frost-bitten wind howled across the Morgan family's lonely farmland, rattling the shutters of the house and whispering through the skeleton trees. Winter had settled in early that year, bringing with it a silence far heavier than snow. But for 13-year-old Eli Morgan, that silence had begun months earlier, on the day the fire stole everything he loved. His grandfather, Thomas Morgan, had been the soul of the farm. Where Eli's father was quiet and stern, his grandfather had been light and laughter. He taught Eli how to fish with a crooked rod, how to whistle through a blade of grass, and how to believe that even the smallest things, like a baby bird fallen from its nest, mattered. When the barn caught fire one spring night, it wasn't just timber and hay that turned to ash. It was Thomas too. And since then, the world had forgotten how to speak. The farmhouse, once filled with music and stories, was now just a house. Eli's mother busied herself in the kitchen, her eyes hollow with forced smiles. His father buried himself in work and silence, speaking only when necessary. Eli wandered through his days like a ghost, drifting through school, through chores, through life, with no one really seeing him. On the edge of one of those bitter nights, as Eli sat curled by the cracked window in his room, wrapped in one of Grandpa's old flannel shirts, he heard it. A cry. It was faint, barely there. But it sliced through the silence with the precision of a blade, not quite a scream, not a bark, not even a whimper. Just sorrow. Raw, real, and aching. Eli straightened, heart pounding. It came again, from deep beyond the tree, line behind the barn. A sound so full of pain that it made something shift inside him. For the first time in months, Eli felt something more than numbness. He felt pulled. He slipped on his boots, grabbed the old lantern from the hook, and crept through the kitchen. His mother didn't stir. His father was already asleep in the den. The house didn't notice him leave, just as it hadn't noticed him lingering. Outside, the wind stung his cheeks and his breath curled in the cold air. He followed the sound, into the woods, past the old stream, through brittle branches that clawed at his coat. The world was a blur of dark and frost, but the sound called him like a beacon. And then, in a small clearing near the edge of the property, he saw it. A fox caught in a mess of barbed wire, its fiery coat streaked with blood, one leg twisted unnaturally. The animal thrashed weakly, its golden eyes wide with terror and pain. But when it saw Eli, it froze. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, Eli didn't see a wild animal. He saw himself, wounded, trapped, alone. He stepped forward slowly. "Hey there," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The fox growled, weak but warning. Eli knelt, hands trembling. "I know you're scared. I am too." His fingers fumbled for his pocket knife. "But I can help you, if you'll let me." The fox didn't move. It didn't flee. It just watched, with eyes full of mistrust and desperate hope. Eli worked quickly, cutting the wire with care. Blood soaked into his sleeve as he freed the injured leg, wrapping it in his scarf. The fox whimpered softly, but made no attempt to escape. Eli took off his coat and wrapped the fox inside, cradling it like a child. Its body was trembling, fragile, but alive. So was his heart, thudding wildly for the first time in what felt like forever. "I've got you," he murmured, tears biting his eyes from the cold and something deeper. "You're not alone." As he walked back through the woods, lanterns swinging by his side and a wounded fox pressed against his chest, Eli didn't know what came next. But for the first time in a long, long time, he felt like he was walking towards something more than grief, something like hope, a sanctuary of silence. The barn was still broken, still charred in the corners, still echoing with memories Eli couldn't silence. After the fire, his father had patched the roof and replaced some beams, but no one went inside much anymore. It stood like a scar on the edge of the Morgan farm, functional, but never quite healed. That made it the perfect place. Eli nudged the heavy door open with his shoulder, cradling the fox wrapped tightly in his coat. The lantern flickered against, the old wooden walls casting long, trembling shadows. Dust swirled in the air, dancing like ghosts in the golden light. He moved quickly, pushing aside hay bales and dragging over the old wool blanket he'd hidden in the corner weeks ago. Just a quiet place where he sometimes sat when the house felt too loud with grief. He laid the fox down gently. Its body was limp, eyes fluttering, but it breathed. Shallow, fast, but real. "You're safe now," Eli whispered. He sat beside the fox all night, curled against the cold. He didn't sleep. He just watched it breathe, each rise and fall of its chest a fragile promise that maybe, just maybe, it would survive. His scarf was still tied around its injured leg, already stained through with blood, but the bleeding had slowed. Dawn crept in slowly, the light cautious, like it didn't want to disturb them. When Eli finally tiptoed back to the house, he moved like a shadow. He grabbed some scraps from the fridge, leftover chicken, a boiled egg, and snuck them into his coat pocket before anyone noticed. He made it back to the barn without a sound. The fox didn't eat at first. It barely opened its eyes. But Eli kept showing up, twice a day, sometimes more. He talked to it like he used to talk to his grandfather. Soft stories, hopes, secrets. "Pain, I used to have a best friend," he said one day, sitting cross-legged beside the fox. "He taught me to skip rocks, climb trees, and laugh even when it hurt. He's gone now, just like everything else, except you," he started calling. The fox Ash. It felt right. The color of his fur, the place they met, the remnants of what both had lost. Ash never responded, not at first, but he didn't run either. That was enough for Eli. Over days, then weeks, Ash began to change. The fear in his eyes dulled. His ears perked when Eli entered. His appetite returned, first in tiny nibbles, then in hungry bites. He started shifting closer when Eli sat beside him until one morning, Ash rested his muzzle against Eli's hand. The boy froze, heart swelling. Slowly, carefully, he let his fingers curl into Ash's fur. "You're not just a fox," Eli murmured. "You're my second chance." They were both healing. Ash's leg, wrapped daily with torn-up towels and the last of Eli's grandfather's herbal salves, began to mend, and Eli, who had carried silence like a second skin, started to feel warmth inside his chest again. The barn, once filled with sorrow, grew alive with this strange friendship. It became a sanctuary, a secret place where the world couldn't judge, where grief softened into connection, where a broken boy and a wounded fox learned how to breathe again. Eli carved a small fox from a piece of driftwood he'd found near the creek, his first time carving since the fire. He placed it beside Ash's sleeping form. The next morning, he found it tucked beneath the fox's paw. No one else knew what was happening inside the barn. No one would have believed him if he'd told them. But Eli knew. He felt it every time. Ash looked at him with those golden eyes. Some bonds didn't need to be spoken to be real. And sometimes the quietest friendships were the ones that saved your life. Discovery and desperation. The days grew longer, and the snow melted into the thirsty earth, but Eli's secret remained tucked safely inside the barn. Every morning before school and every afternoon after chores, he would sneak off with pockets full of scraps, bandages, and whispered words. And Ash, the once frail wild fox, was beginning to walk again. His gait was still uneven, his leg bearing weight cautiously, but there was life in his steps. On some days, Eli swore he saw mischief in those amber eyes, a flicker of something playful. Ash had begun to nudge Eli's hands, nip gently at his boots, and even chase a tossed stick in the hay-dusted shadows of the barn. He was healing, truly healing. And so was Eli, but secrets, no matter how sacred, can only stay hidden for so long. It happened one golden afternoon in early spring. Eli had finished school early and rushed home, taking the back trail through the woods to avoid being seen. He carried a small pouch filled with rabbit meat, something special, a treat for Ash. When he reached the barn, Ash was already waiting at the door, his ears perked, tail flicking gently. Eli grinned and knelt down. "Look what I brought you today," he said. offering the food. Ash stepped forward, sniffing, and began to eat from Eli's palm. It was a moment of trust, one built slowly, one that felt sacred, and that's when the door creaked open behind him. Eli, the boy froze. The voice stopped his breath, turned his blood to ice. He turned slowly and saw his father standing in the doorway, a shovel in one hand, his brow furrowed in confusion, and then rising into something else. "What in God's name are you doing with that fox?" Eli stumbled to his feet, his voice catching. "Dad, wait, he's not dangerous." "Dangerous?" his father barked, stepping forward. Ash backed away instantly, ears flattened, body low to the ground. "That's a wild animal."
"Eli, have you lost your mind?" "No, he was hurt. I found him weeks ago, caught in barbed wire. I couldn't leave him."
Eli's voice cracked, but he stood firm, eyes glassy with tears. "He's not just a wild animal. He's my friend." His father's expression twisted with disbelief. "A friend? Eli, it's a fox. It doesn't care about you. It'll turn on you the second it's strong enough. That's how the wild works." "No, it's not," Eli whispered, voice trembling with a mix of fear and fire. "You don't know him." Ash let out a small growl, retreating toward the shadows of the barn. Eli's father raised the shovel instinctively, and the motion
made something snap in the boy. "Don't you dare hurt him," Eli shouted, stepping in front of the fox. "He's not like that. He saved me." There was a long silence.
The kind that carried too many things unsaid. Eli's father lowered the shovel slowly, eyes locked on his son's tear-streaked face. "Saved you? From what?" Eli swallowed hard. From not feeling anything anymore. That broke something in the air. A truth too heavy to ignore. His father didn't speak for a long moment. He just stared at the fox, who, despite everything, hadn't fled. Finally, he said, quieter now. "You should have told me." Eli's voice was small. "I
didn't think you'd understand." "I don't," his father admitted, setting the shovel down with a thud. "But maybe I should try." He didn't say more. He turned and left, the barn door closing behind him with a soft click. But something had changed. A wall had
cracked. Eli turned back to Ash, who looked at him with calm eyes, tail flicking. "It's okay," Eli said, kneeling again. "We're still together." He wasn't sure what would happen next. Would his father make him release Ash? Would the outside world come barging in to take away the only thing that made sense? He didn't know. But for now, Ash was still there, still choosing to stay. And that was enough to keep Eli holding on. The healing. Between us, the days after Eli's secret was discovered passed in an uneasy peace. His father didn't speak much of the fox, but he also didn't bring the shovel back to the barn. That was a kind of mercy Eli hadn't expected. It wasn't approval, not yet, but it wasn't rejection either. And for a boy who had grown used to silence being the answer to everything, that was something. Ash continued to improve. His limp faded slowly, and his fur, once matted with blood and fear, grew sleek and strong again. His eyes were brighter, now always watching Eli with a quiet, piercing focus that made the boy feel more understood than any human words ever had. There were moments when they simply sat together in the barn, no food between them, no noise, just presence. It was enough. One morning, Eli found himself waking earlier than usual. He didn't even need the alarm. Something in his chest stirred him, a quiet joy he hadn't felt since before the fire. He padded down the stairs, grabbed the flannel blanket and a piece of leftover roast chicken and slipped out toward the barn. He found Ash, curled in the hay, tail tucked neatly around his body. When he entered, Ash lifted his head but didn't move away. That simple gesture, that trust, made Eli's
heart squeeze. "Morning, buddy," he whispered, kneeling down and offering the meat.
Big day. He wasn't sure when he had made the decision, but it had settled in him like the sunrise. Ash was getting better, stronger, healthier. He deserved the choice to go, to be wild again. That was his nature, wasn't it? And Eli couldn't be selfish. He couldn't keep him locked in the barn forever. Still, the idea of letting him go twisted like wire inside Eli's chest. "I want to take you to the hill," he said, stroking Ash's fur slowly. "Just for a while, just so you can see again, smell the trees, feel the wind." Ash nuzzled closer to Eli's leg, his warmth sinking into the boy's skin. Eli smiled faintly. "You can run if you want. I won't stop you. I hope you don't." By midday, they were walking slowly toward the hill behind the orchard, the one Grandpa Thomas used to call the edge of the world. Eli remembered riding on his grandfather's shoulders up this very path, the old man humming songs that didn't exist anywhere but in Eli's memory now. When they reached the top, Eli sat in the grass, letting the wind press against his face. The view stretched far across the valley, rolling fields, trembling trees, and the winding stream below. Ash sniffed the air. For a moment, Eli thought he would bolt, but instead, the fox sat beside him, quiet, still, present. Eli reached into his pocket and pulled out the second carving, the one he had made last night by candlelight. It was a boy and a fox, side by side, like shadows in wood. He placed it on the grass between them. "You saved me, Ash," Eli whispered. "More than anyone knows, before you I didn't care if I disappeared. I didn't even feel like I was real." Ash looked at him, and for a wild heartbeat, Eli imagined the fox understood. "I don't know how to let you go," he admitted, voice cracking. "But I don't know how to keep you either." The sun began to dip low, painting the sky in orange and gold. Ash stood then, walked a few steps forward, stopped, looked back. Eli held his breath. The fox padded forward again, then turned once more. And this time he returned, curling beside Eli, resting his head on the boy's lap like it was the safest place on earth. And maybe, for both of them, it was. That night, when Eli returned to the house, his father was waiting on the porch. He didn't ask questions, he simply said, "You love that animal, don't you?" Eli nodded, throat too tight to speak. His father looked out toward the dark trees. "Then you'd better do it right. Build something better than a barn. Something he can choose to come back to." And just like that, the silence between them shifted, began to mend. Healing didn't always come in loud declarations or grand gestures. Sometimes it came in shared silence, in broken things choosing not to give up, and in the quiet miracle of two wild hearts finding one another. The storm and the choice. Spring had begun to stretch itself across the land, timid buds poking through thawed soil, trees trembling with the promise of green. But the weather in the valley was always unpredictable. It could be gentle and forgiving one day, and then crack open with fury the next. Eli felt it in the wind that morning, restless, sharp, carrying the scent of something unsettled. He watched the sky from his window, clouds swirling like bruises above the hills. Ash was still asleep, in the small shelter Eli had built behind the barn, a sturdier, warmer space with cedar planks and a hatch to let him come and go. His father had helped him build it, though he never said why. The boy's heart had grown full in the weeks since. The distance between him and his father had shortened, word by quiet word. Sometimes they sat on the porch together in the evenings. Sometimes they talked about Grandpa Thomas. Sometimes they didn't talk at all, but the silence no longer hurt. But the clouds kept rolling in. By noon, the sky had darkened like a warning.
Eli rushed outside to check on Ash. He wasn't in the shelter, panic clenched in Eli's chest. "Ash!" he called, scanning the edge of the trees. A flash of red darted through the orchard. The fox was running, fast, wild and instinctive.
Something was wrong. Eli followed, heart thudding, mud splashing against his boots. He called Ash's name again and again, but the wind snatched his voice and flung it back in his face. Then he heard it. A howl, not from Ash, but from deeper in the woods, low. Agonized, Eli froze. Coyotes! He ran harder. Branches scratched his face and tore at his clothes, but he didn't stop. He burst through the trees just in time to see Ash cornered near the riverbank by two lean, snarling shapes. The coyotes circled, teeth bared. Eli didn't think. He grabbed a thick branch and shouted,
"Charging toward them! Get away from him!" The coyotes turned, startled.
One lunged toward Eli but veered off at the last second, confused by the fury in the boy's eyes. Eli swung wildly, striking the air, the ground, anything that would send them fleeing. Finally, they retreated, melting into the trees like shadows. Ash
lay still, his side rising in quick, panicked breaths. Blood seeped from a fresh gash near his flank. "No, no, no," Eli whispered, falling to his knees.
He pressed his hands to the wound.
You're okay! You're okay!"
Tears streamed down his cheeks as thunder cracked above them. The sky let go all at once, sheets of rain soaking them in seconds.
"I won't let you die,"
he choked. "Not now. Not after everything." It took all his strength to carry Ash home. His father met him at the edge of the yard, eyes wide with fear and something else, respect. "He's bleeding badly," Eli gasped. His father didn't hesitate. "Bring him in." Together they laid Ash by the fire. His mother brought towels, herbs, and old medicines. For the first time, the whole family was together, shoulders touching, voices low and urgent, working to save the life of a fox who had somehow stitched them all back together. Hours passed. The rain pounded the roof. Eli never left Ash's
side. He whispered stories, promises, and apologies. "Please don't leave me," he whispered. "You're more than a friend. You're family."
When the storm finally passed and dawn broke once more, Ash opened his eyes. Weak, but alive. And in that fragile morning light, Eli knew something had changed, not just outside, but inside them all. His father's hand came to rest on his shoulder. They didn't need words. Ash had made his choice once before, to stay. And now, after the storm, it was Eli's turn to choose, to stop fearing the goodbye that might come and instead treasure every moment that stayed. Letting go, holding on. The days after the storm passed in a kind of quiet. A sense of reverence hung over the Morgan farm, as though the very earth itself had been reminded of what it had lost and what it had gained back. Ash, though still fragile, was healing. His leg no longer limped, and the wound from the coyote's bite was now just a scar, a reminder of what they'd survived together. Eli spent more time with him in the mornings and in the evenings. They went for longer walks, through the fields, sometimes chasing the rabbits that had been growing more bold with the warmer weather. Ash always stayed close, never too far, always watching, always circling back. There was a rhythm between them now, a bond that was so quietly deep, it seemed almost sacred. But there was a difference in the air, too, something unspoken, hanging.
Heavy in the stillness of those days. Eli had begun to feel it in the pit of his stomach, that gnawing sensation. He didn't want to acknowledge it, didn't want to give it a name.
But he couldn't ignore it any longer. Ash was no longer a sick animal needing protection. He was a wild creature, and wild creatures had to be free. It was the hardest thing Eli had ever felt. Watching Ash's growing strength. Watching him move, with more confidence, more grace. Watching him return to the instincts he had once been born with. Ash was no longer the fox he had found in the storm, trembling and frightened, but the one who had once danced through the forests with his ancestors. Every evening, when Eli sat on the porch, his eyes would wander to the tree line, the long stretch of fields, and the forests that lay beyond. He knew what had to happen. Deep down, he had always known. And yet, every time he tried to say goodbye, the words got caught in his throat. He didn't want to let go. Not after everything they'd been through. Not after the way Ash had healed him, filled him with a purpose, a light he had forgotten existed. But he also knew this wasn't his decision to make. It was Ash's. One afternoon, as the sun began to sink lower in the sky, Eli took a deep breath and stood at the edge of the field. Ash was nearby, sniffing the air, the wind ruffling through his fur. The boy's heart pounded in his chest. "It's time, isn't it?" he said softly, his voice nearly lost in the wind. Ash turned to look at him, those amber eyes steady, filled with understanding. For a moment, neither of them moved. "I don't want you to go," Eli whispered, crouching down slowly. "But you belong out there. You're not mine to keep." The fox padded forward, his tail brushing against Eli's legs, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they'd formed. He licked the boy's hand gently, as if to say, "I know." Eli's throat tightened. Tears blurred his vision, but he didn't blink them away. He'd spent too many years hiding from his feelings, burying them under layers of grief and loss. He owed it to Ash to feel this moment, to let it hurt, to let the love spill out, raw and unguarded. "I'll never forget you," he said, his voice breaking. "You'll always be my friend." Ash hesitated, then turned, as though he understood the weight of the farewell. He glanced back at Eli once more, those amber eyes gleaming with a mixture of gratitude and something else. Something wild and
free. Then with a flick of his tail, he ran. Eli watched him disappear into the trees, his heart aching but also strangely light. The emptiness that had once threatened to swallow him whole was now being replaced with something else, something
that felt like peace. He sat there for hours, long after Ash had vanished from sight. The wind whispered through the grass, and the night sky stretched endlessly above. And Eli, for the first time in a long time, let himself breathe, let himself feel. He would let Ash go, but Ash would always be with him, just as his memories, his lessons, and the wild spirit of freedom would never leave his heart. Eli knew one thing for sure. He had changed. The boy who had once walked through life as if it was a heavy burden had been transformed. The wild fox had taught him that sometimes, in order to truly live, we must let go of what we love most and trust that it will come back to us in the way it's meant to. The return of the wild. The days that followed were quieter. There was a kind of finality in the air, but also an unexpected calm. Eli's father, though he never fully understood the depth of Eli's bond with Ash, said nothing when the fox was gone. He only nodded to his son, as if he too had learned something in the silence that had settled between them. It wasn't long before Eli began to notice small changes around the farm. The trees, which had seemed too still for too long, were beginning to fill with birdsong again. The air smelled sweeter, the earth softer beneath his feet. Even the house, which had once seemed too big and too hollow, felt like home again. A month passed, and Eli no longer waited for the fox's return with the same sense of longing. His heart had adjusted, finding new rhythms in the world without Ash. But there were moments, those quiet moments in the evenings when the wind swept through the fields, that he felt Ash's presence, a rustling in the leaves, a flash of red.
On the horizon, the brush of a tail through the tall grass. And he knew. He knew that Ash had found his place, and that maybe, just maybe, Eli had found his too.